All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Karen Williams, and I am the co-chair of the Portland Utility Board. Our other co-chair, Robin, is on vacation today, so will not be joining us, unfortunately, although not for her. So this is the Portland Utility Board, and under Portland City Code and state law, we are holding this meeting electronically. Board members and relevant city staff are attending remotely, electronically, or by phone, and the city has made it available to the public to listen to the audio broadcast. The meeting is being recorded, and the public will have an opportunity to provide comments during the public comment portion of today's meeting, and can also provide written testimony by emailing utilityboard@portlandoregon.gov. PUB believes and acts on anti-racist principles. In our meeting spaces and interactions within PUB, while every person has the right to share their personal perspective, we stand against wrongful conduct, particularly any conduct that is targeted toward people made vulnerable by systemic inequities. So this means stepping up as a community when there is wrongful conduct and fostering a space of learning and growth. We put our principles into action by speaking up and speaking out. Each of us is empowered to maintain the culture of the Portland Utility Board, and we focus on the impacted individual or population, condemning conduct and not the person.
Hi, my name is Amy Archer Masters, and I'll quickly run through the meeting guidelines. Please state your name before you speak, and if appropriate, who you're addressing or that you're addressing the group. The chat box is only viewable by the hosts, which includes myself and today, Karen Williams. Please limit any chats to technical and logistical issues, including signing up for public comment, asking for technical assistance, or reminding us if you have had your hand raised and are waiting to speak and haven't been called on. The raise hand function is primarily used by the board. The co-hosts may lower your hand once you've begun speaking just to maintain the flow of conversation. And during public comment periods, the public can also raise their hand to be called on when appropriate. If you're connecting by phone, you may need to press *9 to raise your hand. Videos may be turned on when you're speaking if desired, but it is not required. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. If you're connecting by phone, you'll need to press *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Public comment will be taken early in the meeting during public comment period. You can sign up through chat with myself or raise your hand during the comment period. It's also available just prior to any formal board vote after a motion has been made and seconded by board members. As mentioned, the meeting is being recorded. I'll pass it back to you, Karen.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amy. And I'm hoping that lawnmower sound isn't too distracting for folks. Can you confirm, Amy, is my sound coming through okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. I don't pick up the extra noise. So
oh, good. Okay.
From here.
The roaring is ensuing outside my window. Well, welcome. So this is our agenda for today, and we have a couple items of business right at the beginning. Our usual, we'll have a public comment period after disclosures, and we have one set of minutes, I believe, to review from the 4th of April. Yes. And then the bulk of our meeting, all of our meeting is going to be the review of the BES rate study and discussion about that and questions and answers from our BES colleagues that are with us today. And we'll have a few announcements at the end and look toward what you all think are the priorities we should be tackling at our next meeting. So let's do a quick disclosure of communications. If there's anyone that has had contacts with city staff over the last few weeks that you'd like to let us all know about. Teresa.
Hi, this is Teresa Hall, voting member. I have been in contact with a BES staff regarding the Neighborhood 2 Rivers grant, which is one of the grants that my workplace is pursuing. I have also been in contact with the same staff regarding council testimony to support the Neighborhood 2 River grant. So that is my communications so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Sarah.
Hey everyone, this is Sarah Messier, Water Bureau staff and ex officio member. I was part of the administrative review committee process as a pub member, firmly had my pub member hat on, which was very exciting. But I want to flag one of the cases that came up was a person was in a single family home and has an ADU on their property. They were in the financial assistance program and were removed because that ADU makes them a multifamily property. So as part of the ARC committee, we decided to reinstate the person in the financial assistance program, but I just want to flag it for everyone that, I think that this is an opportunity for us to ask some more questions about why ADUs make properties multifamily, why the financial assistance program is so singularly focused on single family homes. And I also have questions about like how duplexes fit in there. So just wanted to flag that for the group. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Yes, that is a topic for rich future discussion. Thanks for flagging that. And thanks for doing the administrative review committee.
Hi, this is Bob.
Yeah.
I can't see, so I just want to jump in at some point on this.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. I was just babbling.
Oh no, not at all. I've been waiting on a bunch of legislation down in Salem that has connections to the work that we do in the city. But the one I wanted to flag for folks that I've been working on in particular now is 3414 HB 3414, which is a bill that would give variances from local land use regulations and other regulations for housing, for all housing. And what that functionally means as written is that any housing developer could come in and demand a variance for things like protecting trees, green roofs requirements, a variety of different things, encroachment into the Willamette River Greenway. So it has pretty profound potential impacts for regulations that have been put in place, that I think particularly at BES here for years and years and years to protect the environment and deal with stormwater. And it's advancing. It's a governor bill, and she's pushing it hard. So I've been waiting a lot on that, not as a member of PUB, but as an advocate.
All right. Thanks for that, Bob. Good to have a window into what's going on down at the legislature for sure. That has implications for our work. Thank you. Anyone else? Doesn't look like it. So let's take a few minutes and see if there's any member of the public that would like to testify, or not testify, but put a comment before the board for our consideration.
I did not receive anything in advance.
Okay. I'm not seeing any member of the public on our call with hand raised or otherwise. So let's go ahead and move on to our minutes review from April 4th. Hope everyone had a chance to glance through those. Are there any additions or corrections that you would like to see reflected in our official record of the April 4th meeting? Going once, going twice. Corrections or additions to the April 4th meeting minutes? All right, hearing none, they stand as the record of our meeting. Thanks, Amelia and Amy, for pulling those together. And I am going to turn the floor over to Anthony and Erin. Not sure who's going first, but yeah, please tell us all about the rate study and let us know how we can provide meaningful input.
And I can share my screen, correct?
I believe so. Amy's kind of running
just stopped sharing mine, so you should be able to pull it up.
We might
Perfect.
start by turning it over to Kristen to get us kicked off, and then
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm Kristen Kibler with JLA Public Involvement, and I'm helping Anthony and Erin with some of the public engagement on the rate study. We've been holding some technical work session discussions with the public, and Erin's been scheduling community engagement meetings with some of the neighborhood coalitions, user groups, lots of folks over the next month. What we've been doing is using the chat to collect questions during the presentation, but I know that you have that turned off. So I do want to check, maybe for protocol's sake, I'm helping them facilitate the meeting. Anthony has the bulk of the presentation, but he's got about a 30-minute presentation that we want to get through the entire thing before we do questions. So maybe two options. Folks can write down or save their questions, and then when we get to the end, we can help facilitate asking those. Or if Karen, and I think Amy sees those too, if Karen is okay, we could collect the questions in the chat, and then Karen could help us read through the questions that are coming up at the end. We don't want people to forget their questions as they go, but we want to make sure we get through all of the information. So I don't know if folks have a preference, or Karen, if you want them to use the chat, you'd have to be involved.
Yeah, I can actually open up the chat for this meeting, and we'll just make sure that it's retained as part of the public record.
Okay, perfect. So Erin, when you flip to the next screen. So the agenda for today is Anthony is going to be giving an overview of environmental services very quick, and then get into the rate study, the recommendations, talk about customer impacts, and then open it up mostly for questions. The presentation does take about 30 minutes, like I just mentioned. So Amy has opened up the chat. If you have questions, put them in the chat as you go so that you don't forget them, or take a note of them, write them down. And then when we get to the end of the 30-minute presentation, 35-minute presentation, we'll go through all the questions. But we do want to make sure that he gets through all of the information before we get rolling. Otherwise, we may be all off track because it's a lot of information. And some of your questions may be answered as he goes. So the purpose of the presentation and of all of the events that we're holding for community members are to collect feedback on the recommendations. BES will be using your feedback and the feedback that they're hearing from others to refine the proposed recommendations that they're making, and then take that refined policy package to the city council for a vote. And that's not till next year. So the next couple months are really the sharing of information and collecting of community feedback on the proposed recommendations. So I'll turn it over to Anthony, and remember to type things in the chat as we go, but we will not get to them for about 30 more minutes.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And just by way of introduction, my name's Anthony Martin. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a financial analyst here in BES. My colleague Erin Abrams and we came on the 4th to talk to you, but just as an introduction, Erin Abrams, also he, him pronouns. He is the kind of public outreach point person, project manager in that regard for this project. So first, I'm going to talk about what we do as a bureau and how we fund it to establish a baseline of understanding before we dig into the rate study. So our mission guides what we do, and it is Environmental Services manages Portland's wastewater and stormwater infrastructure to protect public health and the environment. And how do we achieve that mission? We achieve that mission by providing two core services. First, we collect and treat sanitary sewage. Second, we manage our stormwater. In order to provide these services, BES owns and maintains a large amount of infrastructure, including more than 2,000 miles of pipes, tunnels, and force mains, 2 water treatment plants, 100 pump stations, more than 10,000 green streets, sumps, and ditches, hundreds of miles of streams and rivers, and thousands of acres of habitat. Our staff also conducts a broad range of activities to support and provide sanitary and stormwater services. We plan, design, and construct new infrastructure, operate and maintain our existing infrastructure, rehabilitate aging infrastructure, protect and restore our habitat, regulate our ratepayers and system users, as well as incentivize them. These activities we just discussed cost money. And the pie chart and on this slide shows our budget, what we spend money on. The rate study doesn't talk about making changes to these services or spending priorities. Those things get approved via council and the public process, which you all are very intricately involved in. As you can see, we spend almost 2/3 of our money on capital improvements, either in the form of debt service for infrastructure that we've built in the past, or for capital spending. The next largest portion is operations and maintenance activities, like cleaning pipes and running the treatment plant, followed by general fund costs that support the city. Of course, in order to do those activities, we collect revenue. How do we fund our work? The Bureau has many different revenue sources, primarily listed on the slide. Rates are our primary revenue source that make up approximately 90% of our revenue. Our next largest funding source is system development charges, or SDCs, which come in at about 5%. And the final 5% of our funding includes development fees, other fees, revenue from other bureaus, and grants, which are a very minor revenue source. The last item on the slide is bond sales, which is technically how we fund capital projects, but it's paid back through rates, which is why it's not in the pie chart. So now that we've given you a high-level overview of the Bureau's work and funding, I want to transition to discuss the rate study. And before we can talk about the recommendations in the rate study, we need to answer the question, what is a rate study? A rate study is a really broad term that covers financial evaluation processes where the utility, in this case, environmental services, reviews its rate structure to make sure that the cost for ratepayers is proportional to their impact on the system. Rate studies are really common activities for utilities. They're considered a best practice and an important tool for ensuring that our rates match the cost of providing service. Environmental Services hired an independent consultant to conduct a technical analysis and deliver the recommendations that we talk about. The rate study analysis is built on desired outcomes and goals, which are shown on this slide. These include cost of service principles, which is also known as recovering costs in proportion to the demand on the system, equity, BES and city values, administrative feasibility, and removing barriers to accessing services. Another goal is to address and consider affordability concerns as much as possible. It's important to note that affordability and equity are two very primary considerations for the Bureau overall. However, rates can only address these items so much due to how they must be applied to all customers. You can consider rates as a blunt instrument when we need a far more precise set of tools to address these issues. As such, the results of this rate study serve as a foundation for larger conversations of affordability and equity. In other words, this is a beginning and nowhere near the end on those two issues. I want to share what was and wasn't analyzed, as well as which things this technical discussion will immediately affect. To be clear, though, when we ask questions, it's also kind of questions, comments, observations, and that does not need to be limited to what's in this scope. I just want to contextualize. The rate study is a revenue neutral look at a point in time. We look at all the revenue sources and compare them to the, we look at all the revenue sources and compare them to the types of expenses we have. Now go with me on this. You can think of the rate study like a pie, where the pie is the amount of revenue that we need to operate. The rate study analysis did not look at the size of the pie or if it had the right ingredients. It just looked at how best to slice the pie. So first, this study is a broad review of the different methodologies behind how we collect our revenue and charge people for different services we provide. We started by comparing environmental services to industry benchmarks, other cities that are doing good things, and best practices, which are procedures and practices generally considered to be most effective. We also reviewed the Clean River Rewards program, a discount for ratepayers who manage their stormwater runoff on their property. Finally, the consultant produced a set of options for potential revision to our rate methodologies. We also do rate studies internally each year to determine those rate increases. That's a separate process from here. As you all know, our rates increase every July 1st for things like inflation, maintenance and operations, and capital costs, and that's addressed during the budget process. As noted on the previous slide, we're looking at how best to slice the pie, not how big or what's in it. The consultant did not look at changing our mission or services, changes to the infrastructure we build, also known as the Capital Improvement Program, or the amount of revenue we intend to collect. We also did not look at the low-income assistance or affordability programs. While rates directly impact these affordability programs, the rates themselves are not affordability programs. However, we do know that rates can advance affordability in our community, which we attempted to do. Just to repeat though, our discussion and what you want to share with us during the questions and observations time doesn't need to be limited to what's in and out of scope to this rate study. We're really looking to hear from you. Now that we've talked about what a rate study is and what we did, we can get to our outcomes of the analysis. Our findings are identified in 4 major points on this slide. First is that current rates are among the highest, current rates are among the highest the utility, that the consultant surveyed, but rate increases of other jurisdictions are higher than our own. And this is because we've made major investments earlier than other cities. An example of that is the Big Pipe. Next, our processes for collecting revenue mostly meet or exceed industry standards and best practices. For example, our extra strength program impressed the consultant a lot. Of course, there are areas of improvement, which we'll discuss on the next slide. Next is our spending and investment since we last conducted a rate study has changed fairly dramatically. The last time we conducted an external rate study was in 2005, 18 years ago, and we've been using those underlying assumptions since then. Changes since 2005 include the Big Pipe, STEP, or the Secondary Treatment Expansion Program, and major stormwater investments. Additionally, some changes to our current methodology are warranted to achieve goals around fairness and affordability. These findings and others are found in the consultant options report on the website. There is a rate study website with all of this kind of backing information. After we received the options report from the consultant, we worked with them to identify a set of recommendations to move forward, which we'll discuss here at a high level and in greater detail on the ensuing slides. First, we're going to recover more revenue from stormwater rates and less from sanitary rates. As noted in the previous slide, we've invested in our stormwater system and our rates should reflect that. Next, we're moving away from on-site and off-site as a way to conceptualize our stormwater charges. As a reminder, the allocation of costs between on and off-site categories followed the City Council's direction in April of 2000 that BES explicitly calculate and identify on the customer bill the share of stormwater charges associated with public streets and the environment. That's the off-site charge. That's a relatively unique concept in Portland. Or it's a relatively unique concept to Portland in the context of stormwater rates. In addition to moving away from the on-site and off-site concept, we're adding another component to the stormwater charge. That's a per unit charge. You can think of that like water's base charge or the impervious area component on the stormwater charge, and that it will be fixed for each property. The third recommendation is to tier charges for single-family residential properties rather than charging a flat rate per home. In addition to stormwater rate changes for everyone, we also adjusted rates for special customers with a focus on customers within the current drainage districts, as well as over water structures like docks and floating homes to ensure that they are paying rates in proportion to their impact on the system. In case some folks are unaware, the drainage districts are flood control districts that are located on the banks of the Columbia. Finally, we're simplifying and expanding the eligibility of Clean River Awards, the stormwater discount program. The first recommendation is to shift rates to match our costs. This means that sewer rates will go down compared to what as a proportion of the amount that we're recovering, and stormwater rates will go up. These percentages may seem like a tiny shift, but we are talking about millions of dollars. And to put it simply, costs have shifted, and to align with cost of service principles noted before, revenue collection should match our spending. Commercial and industrial users tend to pay more for stormwater as a rate class, and residential customers tend to pay more for sanitary as a rate class. As a result, overall costs shift slightly to commercial and industrial. The next recommendation is to modify our stormwater charges. As you may know, we charge stormwater costs based on impervious area. Instead of on-site charge and an off-site charge, both based on impervious area, we're moving to think of the stormwater charge as a whole. Previously, the on-site portion of costs, or the cost that can be mitigated by ratepayers managing their stormwater on-site, was used to calculate the maximum Clean River Awards credit, and it showed up on your bill. The maximum Clean River Awards credit will still be 35%, but it's now tied to a conception of on-site costs and common stormwater costs, so common that everyone should pay. This won't show up on your bill anymore. That's a behind the scenes calculation now. Additionally, the allocation of off-site stormwater costs to customers in proportion to their on-site impervious area reflects prior city council policy. Now the overall stormwater charge will be split between two different billing components, impervious area and equivalent service units, or ESUs. Impervious area will be charged to cover 80% of the stormwater costs for the system because impervious area is a decent proxy for overall impact on the stormwater system and is an industry standard way to charge ratepayers. The other 20% will be charged based on that ESU. An ESU is a unit based on the number of people per dwelling, where one single family home is 1 ESU. One multifamily dwelling is 0.65 ESUs based on differences in occupancy. And then 2,400 square feet of commercial impervious area is 1 ESU. ESUs align with cost of service principles as the number of dwelling units and people served are related to stormwater needs in the public right-of-way, as well as other regulatory requirements like education and outreach. The ESU will cover costs including water quality protection, natural functions, and a portion of our right-of-way flow. On to the next recommendation. Currently, BES assumes a flat amount of 2,400 square feet of impervious area for all single-family residential homes. This is relatively common for utilities because charging each single-family property is too administratively difficult, and the number was based on average impervious area from a survey of properties across the city. However, we know that the average doesn't tell the full story, and actual impervious area varies widely depending on the home. Right now, if you're a tiny home or a larger home, you're charged the same amount, which is something we've recommended to improve. We recommended tier single-family residential rates to balance fairness with that administrative feasibility. There will be 4 tiers, as you can see on the slide. Broadly, we're covering the low, which is tier 1 that will be charged 1,200 square feet. The medium, tier 2, which will be charged 2,400 square feet of impervious area, and the high, which is tier 3 that would be charged 3,600 square feet of impervious area. Those are different values of impervious area on a property in our community. The 4th tier on there will be for the largest properties that really should be charged actual impervious area. You may notice that we don't have a maximum on tier 3 yet, and that's because we're still working on determining what would fall into that 4th tier. We did hear a pub member express a desire for charging all customers for actual impervious area on the 4th. And we did answer that question last year. And I just wanted to provide that answer. So charging each single family residential property based on actual impervious area would require a very large administrative effort for us. One staff member provided a rough estimate of at least $500,000 for a consultant contract to complete this task. A consultant would be necessary, especially as staffing capacity is not available for this task, and they would need to analyze each lot in the city and determine impervious area. For properties where imaging, aerial imaging or LiDAR data doesn't adequately show impervious area due to tree cover, which is very common in our city, of course, we're very proud of that. The consultant would need to actually examine each of those lots in person. Additionally, it would require an ongoing process and policy changes to ensure for consistent updates, similar to our commercial and multifamily customers. Staff proposed these tiers for single-family customers to balance that administrative feasibility and equity. So really put simply, we could charge based on actual impervious area for every single family home. However, the cost associated with that compared to the benefit is not really administratively viable. So that is one of the questions we had. We'll answer the other questions we had gotten later on in the PowerPoint. The next section is about special customer class rates. There are 2 categories of these special customer class rates. Rates for customers based on what they do or don't put in the system. These are on the sanitary side of services and include things like irrigation and breweries. The other set of special customers are ratepayers that get special rates based on where they are. These are on the stormwater side of services. First, we'll talk about the special rates based on what ratepayers do, which are extra strength and special meter charges. Those rates will be reduced to match the cost of providing services to those customers. This means that ratepayers like breweries or those with deduct meters for irrigation will see a decrease in their bill. The next set of special customer rates we'll talk about are based on where the ratepayer is. First up is drainage districts. You can see a map of the drainage districts there. Currently, drainage district customers receive a rate that's based on the off-site portion of the stormwater charge. This rate level was set via a policy discussion several years ago. We recommend to change this and charge rates based on the cost of providing service to these customers rather than a policy decision. This means that instead of stormwater rates that are 35% less than customers in the rest of the city, the rate will be approximately 3.4% less than customers in the rest of the city. One important thing to note here too is that drainage district customers are not currently eligible for Clean River Awards, and they will be under this recommendation. I want to note that we are discussing this at a high level for all the customers. We have been scheduling specific meetings with drainage district customers as well as over water structures to make sure that we're communicating this information, having that conversation. The final set of special customers are over water structures. Currently, overwater structures are not charged a stormwater rate due to a council decision several years ago in 2018. That decision also directed BES to conduct this rate study. Similar to other special customer rates, we recommend to set this rate based on the cost of providing service. This means that overwater structures like docks and floating homes will be charged a stormwater rate that is approximately 12% less than impervious area that's on land. Again, we're discussing this at a high level, and we are talking to folks with overwater structures and floating homes. Finally, we'll discuss the Clean River Awards program. For those unfamiliar, the program is a stormwater discount for ratepayers, residential and commercial, who safely manage some or all of their stormwater on their properties. Customers must register to receive the discount. You can see in the table various high-level proposed changes. At the top is the discount amount for the stormwater fee, which stays constant at 35%. And even though the underlying math is changing, the credit stays the same. Recommendations include adding a renewal period, removing the requirement that accounts have no outstanding balances, includes drainage district customers in the program, and pivots from a fairly complex credit calculation to a more simple credit calculation based on existing stormwater regulations. For those of you that may know our regulations, it is compliance with the Stormwater Management Manual. The outcome of these recommendations will be to increase the number of ratepayers receiving a full credit and make it easier for ratepayers to apply. I know this has been a lot of information, and it's been focused primarily on what in terms of what's happening. This slide and the next slides really show how the changes I've been presenting impact customers. First, as you can see in the graphic at the right, at the customer class level, there are relatively minor shifts overall. Overall, costs are shifting from wastewater to stormwater, meaning commercial customers will pay more and residential customers, particularly multifamily, will pay less. Additionally, by adding an ESU component to the stormwater charge, we shift costs from single family and commercial customers to multifamily customers. It's important to note that individual properties will see changes based on a combination of their sewer flow, impervious area, overwater structure impervious area, whether they're in the drainage district, and a number of dwelling units on their property. However, the list of customers that will generally see lower and higher bills is shown for reference. For example, we know that customers who will generally see lower bills are customers who have high extra strength usage or high sewer flow. Additionally, the single family customers in that tier 1, the low, for stormwater will see a decreased bill. We know that customers that will see higher bills generally are those with higher impervious area. Also, dense multifamily customers will generally see an increase. So thinking apartments in the Pearl rather than your kind of three-story walk-ups, less dense stuff. Also, those tier 3 or the large single family customers will receive a higher stormwater bill and therefore higher bill overall. And then, of course, overwater structures and drainage district customers will see higher bills, pivoting from policy decisions on how to charge them to the cost of providing the service. Oh, sorry about that. Now that we've talked at that high level, we'll zoom in for a second and talk about customer impacts by specific customer classes. And I will just say we're almost done-ish, probably another 10 minutes or so. First, we'll talk about general impacts on multifamily customers. There are two important points here. First is that denser apartment complexes will generally pay more. As you can see, the higher ratio of units to impervious area means that the bill is more likely to increase. Another change that's not explicitly shown here is that higher sewer flow decreases bill impact. Large sewer flow per unit generally means that they'll see a decreased bill because sanitary rates are going to cover less cost. Every apartment will be assessed differently. And just as a note, all the impacts at the bottom of this slide and the next coming slides are all per month. Next up, you can see the general impact of shifting to stormwater costs for commercial and industrial customers. Customers with intensive sewer flows will see larger decreases, whereas customers with large amounts of impervious area will see an increase. You can see here that a medical center, which would have very high sewer flow, is going to see a decrease in their bill, whereas your office campus, which has relatively low sewer flow, but a large amount of impervious area, is going to see an increase there. Finally, customers with extra strength flow, like breweries, will likely see a decrease in their bill because the sewer flow and extra strength flow specifically is a large portion of their bill. So you can see here a brewery with extra strength flow would see a decrease. We see that this is for single family customers. We see that customers that will be in that tier 1 will pay about 18% less. In tier 2, they'll pay just about the same that they currently do. And in tier 3, they'll see about a 16% increase. In terms of the number of customers that fall into each of these tiers, it's approximately 20% of the population of single family customers are going to be in tier 1, 20% in tier 3, and the other 60% in tier 2. So just to kind of map that out. As you can see, we're not really talking about the 4th tier. We're really envisioning relatively few customers to be there, just so you know. As a kind of reference, because we're going to talk about questions and discussion and stuff relatively soon, here are the discussions that we asked, here are the questions we asked at the technical discussions for reference. We'll go back to these when we get into questions shortly, but we just wanted to show you what questions we had been asking folks at the technical discussions. Now that we've talked about the rate study, we wanted to explicitly address some of the questions that were posed in the April 4th pub meeting that are not directly related to the rate study, but are things that were asked that we want to be sure to answer. So first, we had gotten is, why does the Bureau not charge for compacted gravel? This has been addressed with pub as a whole and with a specific pub member a couple times, but I feel it makes sense to kind of include it here. BES does not currently charge compacted gravel and has considered a policy change to do so. There are many policy considerations on this issue, including things like the definition of compaction, testing procedures and verification, changes to the development review process, and an appeal process. BES concluded that compacted gravel sites would require administrative resources which do not currently exist, and the costs are not comparable to the increase in customer revenue. Similar to the single family customers, why not charge all of them? It's balancing that administrative feasibility with the equity there. And specifically for compacted gravel, it would be very difficult to put in place a set of procedures for every property that doesn't effectively cost more than the amount of revenue that could be collected from those compacted gravel customers. The next question is, how do we determine whether a property is commercial or residential? The Portland Water Bureau relies on county tax records for zoning and zoning to assign either single-family residential, multifamily residential, or commercial, which is administratively feasible compared to site visits. Errors may be caught and corrected when other account actions are taken. So for example, if an application for financial assistance indicates that that customer is multifamily or commercial, they'll check to see, is it really single family or is it something else? The next question is, does BES have a practice of not charging for properties being developed and redeveloped? The high-level answer is no. BES continues to charge stormwater regardless of the use of the property. If impervious area exists, including a slab, a concrete slab, we do charge stormwater rates based on impervious area. BES will stop and start sewer billing in tandem with water provision or when sewer connection permits are finalized for new public sewer connections. Because we bill on consumption, if a property is vacant, we would continue to bill the base charge for account management, but not a sewer charge, presuming consumption is 0 if it's vacant. Now I'm going to throw it over quickly to Aaron to speak to kind of the public outreach, what we've done so far, what we're going to keep doing in the future, and let the pub know about the community presentations we have scheduled.
Hey, everybody. I'll just let you know that we have been scheduling presentations with a wide range of community organizations, neighborhood associations, business districts, et cetera, et cetera. We were hoping to host up to 24 of those if we can. If you have an organization or know of one that might benefit from a presentation like this, or more importantly, we would benefit from hearing from them, please let me know. We also have office hours that we can schedule there on the website. If you want to deep dive on a specific technical question, we can set aside some time to really go into one of the details. So on the website, you can look for some times. We should probably extend the hours. I think we're done by the end of the month, but we should add some more. And this outreach effort is going to extend through roughly the end of June, I think is where we're targeting. We can go a little longer than that, but we are coming up against some deadlines for needing to start getting stuff moving through the various processes to get things adopted and et cetera. So we have many meetings scheduled. We have already conducted 2 really deep dive technical discussions with a group of about 25 people, I think total is where we landed. And those folks represented everyone from the port and other industrial customers to environmental activists, et cetera, et cetera. And we're just now extending out into the community. You may see invitations from your neighborhood coalition to presentations similar to this and conversations similar to this coming up throughout May, basically. So like I said, the best place to go for more information on this and for regular updates is the Rate Study webpage, and you can sign up for updates on this project and many, many other projects too. You can sign up there with via our GovDelivery email service. So that's probably the best way to keep up with things. And you can see I have my contact information there. Feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions or comments. That's about it.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Mm-hmm. And next up, we are now at the questions, discussions, observation. Kristen, I'm going to defer to you. We do have these technical discussion questions. Should we just leave these up on the screen as we talk, or do you want to stop sharing?
Yeah, why don't you leave those up for now? But maybe first, I didn't see any questions in the chat, but let's maybe for the next 5 minutes, does anybody have any clarifying questions? Does anybody want Anthony to go back to a slide that something didn't make sense? This was a lot of information given to you. So if there was something that was, didn't quite make sense, or another explanation or a clarifying question, let's do that first. And then let's kind of get some thoughts on what you heard in reaction. But first, do you have a question of something that did not quite make sense to you?
Bob.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. It was super helpful. I have a question about overwater structures, and I just want to make sure, because you mentioned that you're moving to a new approach, and I'm just curious about more of the justification on that, and particularly the argument that overwater structures made that they shouldn't have to pay because the water would have gotten into the water anyways if they weren't there. And I'm just curious if you can elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So there's a couple components. The first is that the stormwater system across the entire city is set up to benefit the city as a whole. So we do recognize that there are certain places in our system that we have relatively less infrastructure than others. For example, on the far east side, the soils are such that we don't need as much infrastructure. whereas in the center of the city, we have the CSO pipe, the big pipe, to be able to capture the stormwater flow there. I say that to say that across our entire city, we build the stormwater system to benefit everyone. And as such, there's certain costs that everyone needs to partake in, particularly things like debt service. And, there are lots of costs that we just kind of do, permit compliance and things like that, that overwater structures are similarly should be responsible for as they benefit from the system as a whole. If they, get off of their overwater structure and drive on our roads, participate, go to a different business that also pays stormwater rates. Additionally, another component of that is that the water quality in the Willamette and Columbia rivers is something that the city of Portland is partly responsible for in our permit requirements. And we do know that runoff from roofs or any impervious area runoff really does bring pollutants with it. So you are correct that if that overwater structure did not exist, that water would go straight into the river. However, it would do so not having come into contact with pollutants potentially. We are working on a series of frequently asked questions. This has been a relatively common question asked. And we have some scientific backing to, in case someone wants to dig into the scientific side of pollutants and runoff. And, my understanding is that metal roofs put off copper, I believe it is, as well as any of the drainage structures. So kind of, gutters and whatnot are generally made with a certain metal that has leaches zinc. So things like that, water quality issues there do have a direct impact on the stormwater infrastructure that we provide. So it's a combination of, there are a lot of costs that everyone should pay for, as well as there is an impact on our stormwater system from those customers. We created that special customer rate to recognize that there are some components of our system that the overwater structures do not benefit from. And specifically, that's local collection and conveyance. So think about the pipe that's in a cul-de-sac. That overwater structure isn't necessarily benefiting from that, but they are benefiting from flood mitigation by our larger conveyance system, as well as all the other things I had noted. Does that help? Yes, Bob.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much for that answer. And I'm really, really glad to hear some of the things you're saying, especially about the pollutants and things like that. It's really great that the city went back and validated that, because that was brought up when it was an issue at the time. And so appreciate all the work on that.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we will have we have some great scientists at the Bureau who did some very extensive combination of literature review and work to make sure that we are there's a scientific backing to it.
I think we have Karen and then Alexis. Hopefully I got that order right.
Sure, thanks. So my question is about the equivalent service units, the ESUs. So could I have another walkthrough about how that is determined, and how the rate how the rate accounts for particularly the what's it called, the water, hang on one sec, I'm kind of looking at the report, equivalent service units. So that's what I'd like more of an explanation about. And then the report says that all costs included in the water quality protection and natural functions services characteristic. So could someone kind of walk me through again exactly what an ESU is, and then how costs are calculated to reflect the water quality impact of that ESU? I think that's what my question is.
Thank you. And I definitely understand it, and I get how this is sometimes confusing. So one of the things you said was service characteristic, and that is it sounds very difficult, but that's just one of the steps in the process of allocating costs to customers. So we talked about slicing the pie. we identify why we're spending the money so we can best slice the pie and allocate it to customers in the correct way. One of the ways that we've identified a kind of service characteristic, so a cost component of what we do, is that natural functions. So we go through our budget and we identify first, what parts of our budget are related to the sanitary system and what parts are related to the stormwater system. And then we go even deeper than that and say, okay, what in the stormwater system is this benefiting? Is it benefiting the local conveyance? Is it benefiting our regional conveyance system? Is it benefiting our natural areas? So that water quality protection is the portion of our budget that we spend on stormwater water quality protection specifically. So that's kind of how we get a portion of those costs. For what is an equivalent service unit? That's a really good question. At a high level, there are a lot of ways that a city can charge for stormwater. Impervious areas are a really common way, but there are also a lot of other ways that use equivalent service units or equivalent dwelling units. You'll see a lot of EDUs and ESUs if you look in kind of the way most cities charge. And so the equivalent service unit is really an intent to account for people as a modifier for impact on our stormwater system. We recognize that impervious area is a proxy for that impact overall, but also that some of our costs aren't just related to impervious area. If everyone in the entire city were to, mitigate their impervious area, we'd still have some costs to deal with, and also some things like how much outreach we need to do for permit requirements. Those types of things are influenced by the number of people we have. So the equivalent service unit is a way to account for impact on our stormwater system in a different way than impervious area. And how we did that is based on occupancy characteristics. So that's why one ESU is one single family dwelling unit. So that's kind of the basis that we're looking at the other customer classes for. And we see that multifamily units are generally less occupied. There are fewer people per unit in multifamily units than single family units. So for a multifamily unit, it's 0.65 ESUs for one dwelling unit. And then because we need a way to calculate this for commercial customers, there's not a people per, dwelling unit on the commercial side. We use 2,400 square feet of impervious area, which is a single family home, are kind of what we consider the average single family home impervious area as a proxy for them for that ESU. So I think I got through all of your questions. Did I address everything?
Could you just say that last part one more time about using the 2,400 impervious area? What does that represent? That was the only part I didn't quite catch.
No worries. The 2,400 square feet of impervious area is how much we charge single family customers. So if we're going to figure out a way to compare commercial and single family customers, that's the closest we can get, because there's not really a dwelling unit. There's not a way to convert a business or a commercial customer to the amount of people living there.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. Lorraine had her hand up next.
I think there was someone before me.
Oh, Alexis had her question answered during that last Anthony's answer to Karen. So.
Okay, just hold on one minute. I need to take something off the phone.
And folks can look at these questions that we have on the screen after Lorraine gives her questions. We can go through some of these. These are questions that we asked at the technical conversations that we held a couple weeks ago. And so these are the questions that were asked of folks, of like the tiering structure for single family, and even about the incentive programs, the Clean River Rewards program.
So thanks so much. Sorry about that delay. So my question is well, I have more than one, but one of the questions I have is with regard to the tier single family residential stormwater charges. And the first question I have is I'm trying to understand exactly what you mean by multifamily unit. Is that apartment buildings specifically?
Oh, sorry, I thought maybe you were going to ask all the questions at once. I
I'll fo-
apologize.
I
Yes.
have I have a follow-up question. That's just
Yeah,
one.
no worries.
Uh-huh.
So when we're talking about single family, we're talking about single dwelling units on a property. So anything above one dwelling unit is considered generally as considered multifamily. So for anything that's a duplex, triplex, or quadplex, so 2, 3, or 4 units on a property, we have a set assumption of here's how much impervious area per unit there is. And then anything 5 multifamily, 5 dwelling units and above, we just charge based on actual impervious area.
Okay. And then you're talking about the tiered system. It has tier 1, 2, 3, and 4, but in the small prints at the bottom, you put impervious area based on 5,000 square foot a lot. So am I to assume, and that's never a good thing to do, that the most someone will pay is for 5,000 square foot?
No. So I believe you're referencing the large tier, so the tier 4.
Mhm.
There are going to be some customers that we bill based on actual impervious area. And we haven't identified those customers yet, but they will be charged however much actual impervious area they have. So it could be more than 5,000 square feet, but that'll be a relatively a very small number of single family customers.
Okay. And then you let me see. In one of the slides, you were talking about sewer flow. Oh, that was with regard to like commercial. You made a comparison between a medical center and an office campus, and you mentioned sewer flow versus impervious area. And I'm trying to understand the reasoning behind the either or, which is what I got from it, and you may need to correct me that there was an either or, that you all sewer flow versus impervious area, and I just need to understand that a little bit better.
Anthony,
Yeah,
do you
thank
want
you.
to flip? Anthony, do you want to flip to that image?
Certainly.
Would that help too when he's discussing, Lorraine?
Yes.
Yeah, so the purpose on showing this isn't to show an either or, but rather just to show some of the kind of explain the higher level impacts and how they would affect. So what I would say is that sewer flow is how we charge the sanitary sewer component of our charges, and impervious area is how we charge most of the stormwater component of our charge. So it's not an either or. Those are just the 2 main components we use to calculate your bill overall. And so what we're trying to show is that if one of those components is larger, you'll generally see a certain impact. So if your sewer flow is larger, then you're generally going to see that decrease in your bill. Whereas if impervious area is larger, you're generally going to see an increase. It's not an either or, because there are customers with really high sewer flow and really high impervious area. It's just to try and show, like, generally these are the impacts that a customer would see, because it's going to be so dependent on that specific customer's like usage characteristics. Yeah. Does that help?
It does. Thanks.
Okay, good.
Anybody else have any clarifying questions or want to see any of the graphics related that Anthony had shared during the presentation to ask any questions? Karen?
I do have one more that I think would fit in clarifying questions. And I wonder if could we go back to the picture that shows the multi-family dwelling units? There was the high rise. Yeah, that one. Thank you. So my question is about the parking garage that's underneath that high density structure. So let's see. Am I correct that because, well, let me see. So that customer is paying more, estimated, in that dwelling, and the customer, let's see. in the lower density with more surface parking is paying less. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I had that right. So my question is, are we properly taking into account, let's say, the hydrologic effects of that parking garage underneath the high density structure by I don't want to say giving them a better deal, because that's not it's not exactly, I don't think, what's being portrayed, but I guess I'm concerned that we're not taking into account the environmental effects of a parking garage, subsurface, granted, that still has a hydrologic effect, and the 500 cars that are within that parking garage and the effect that they have on stormwater runoff. So how are the environmental effects of that parking garage and all those cars being accounted for in this rate structure, if they are at all?
Yeah, so the high level answer there is that they are not. To zoom out a little, the intent of this is to show more of, and this is one of the areas that we worked on internally a lot, but I'll be fairly technical, is the relationship between impervious area and number of dwelling units is the key determinant for if a multifamily customer is going to see an increase in their bill. So what we're trying to show here is that the denser you are, the more likely you are to pay more. Not necessarily about the parking garage itself. It's more about the density of dwelling units rather than the parking garage. You mentioned hydrologic effects. If there were effects like that from a parking garage, generally those would be mitigated during the development review process and building. And also that is some of our accounts, some of our customers do have specific, they have to pay rates for, dewatering the garage or things like that. So that those effects that you mentioned are addressed in other ways, either during our development review or that type of process. And they aren't counted or considered. That kind of environmental impact of a parking garage, so to speak, isn't considered in the rate structure itself. And the reason being is that it's not one of the well, no, I don't need to dig into the detail there. I might have been unintentionally creating a distinction without a difference, so I figure I'll stop there.
Does that help, Karen? Lorraine, you had your hand up next, and then
I do. When I say this, I think it dates me, but I was listening to NPR, and I do listen to NPR this week, and they were talking about certain rate scales that they're introducing in California. Not that I'm suggesting that we follow California or anything like that, but I'm curious about what the recommendations are here today, since nothing is new. Have there been any comparison, or are there other examples to what it is being recommended? And what have been the lessons learned or challenges or successes that came out of similar recommendations for this, for what is being proposed? I'm just curious.
Yeah, thank you for that. So in the first phase of our rate study, we conducted what we called a benchmarking study, where we looked at several utilities across the country to kind of see how we're doing compared to them. How do we charge rates compared to them? What is our rate? We did that kind of review. And that's where it found that the stormwater rates that we charge, while generally in line with industry standard, could be better, which is why we changed to charging for impervious area and ESUs rather than doing an on-site and an off-site component. We did look at kind of those best practices. You talked about challenges and successes from similar recommendations. And I think from a high level, I struggle with that question. Could you elaborate on that question a little further for me to make sure I'm answering it correctly?
Sure. It's just that, if there is something out there that we may be modeling or taking parts from, that there would have been, you know, some challenges or some successes, and if those were taken into consideration um, in what you're proposing.
Yeah, we definitely did. I think one of the things that we definitely ran into was administrative feasibility. So getting back to a little bit of a theme, and it's one of the goals here, is trying to balance that. There's rate equity is what it's called. So I don't want to confuse. Equity has a ton of different definitions, and more often than not in Portland, we're talking about racial equity. When I say equity right now, I'm talking about rate equity, ensuring that everyone pays kind of precisely what they impact the system, you know, the cost of serving them, that cost. And so it's always that balance between how do we do that in a way that is administratively feasible. So we chose a path that had success internally as well for administrative feasibility, you know, working with the Water Bureau in Kayenta, making sure that it's something that can be implemented. There are definitely other ways for folks to charge that are more, there are some paths that we chose not to go down because the likelihood of administrative feasibility was just a little too tough. You know, we want to balance that and make sure we're not only being good stewards of money, but that we're not unintentionally kind of charging someone for the need to figure out how to charge them correctly, if that makes sense. So I hope that answers your question. Does that get what you were looking for?
It does. And in coming up with the recommendations, I'm thinking, because over the last few months that I've been on the hub, which is not quite a year yet, and I'm learning a lot, you know, the first thing that I did was that I toured the plant out in Northeast, right? And as a previous worker at the city of Portland, when you look across bureaus, we know that there are a number of infrastructures that are, let me be politically correct. I want to say collapsing, but I will not say that, are in a very bad state, right? And that is one of the challenges we here at PUB are hearing about, you know, infrastructure, you know, operating costs. How are things, you know, deferred maintenance, a lot of deferred. I can't even remember the number right now about what that is. So how do we, is that being considered? Because, you know, without us having working infrastructure, we cannot serve the people. So we could be charging them, but then we're not providing them with the best service. But then on the other end of that now is the cost, right? Because the longer we defer, is the more expensive things going to get, and it's going to cost more. So I'm just wondering, I'm probably just not asking a question, but just thinking through all these things to try and figure out, okay, how are we to ensure that the recommendations that are being made here today would actually address those things? So do we have to wait 2 years down the road, or 3 years down the road, or 5 years down the road, and we realize, oops, we missed it, and it made things worse, or, you know, it just maintained where we're at right now, which is, I don't think the status quo is very good, or that we've created a rate system that is really geared to addressing, you know, creating miracles, probably is what I should say.
So what I would say there is you definitely you shared concerns that we internally have discussed for sure. I know that when we had presented to PUB, we made clear the kind of deferred maintenance backlog we have, the needs we have as a bureau. Those are all very valid concerns. The rate study itself doesn't directly address those things. And it gets back to the kind of size of the pie versus how we cut it. The idea here for the rate study is that we're not looking at how much we're spending on that deferred maintenance. We're just looking at, are we taking what we're currently spending money on and allocating it to each customer correctly, or in as right a way as possible that aligns with our goals and values. So at a high level, no, this rate study or the proposed rate structure does not address what you're looking for. But additionally, the reason why is because that those types of things are kind of other activities that the Bureau is doing. You know, our annual budget process can talk about that deferred maintenance and how we're going to tackle it. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the other stuff of identifying our condition assessment and identifying that backlog, identifying strategies to solve it. But the rate study does not address those things. And rates in general really kind of can't address those things just by themselves, because because this didn't look at increasing the pie, the amount of money we get, just looked at how we're collecting the amount of money we say that we need.
Thank you.
Anthony, do you want to flip to the last questions? Does anybody else have any clarifying questions? We can go through the technical work session conversations that we've had. We did get a lot of folks like the idea of the tiered rates for single family properties instead of one flat rate for every. There was support for that. And then with the incentive programs, there was a lot of interest in the Clean River Rewards program expanding to more areas. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts about that in general? Either of those? Those were fairly well supported, I would say, at the meetings we've had so far. Silence. Let's see. Any other specific customers anybody would like to talk about?
Well, wait one sec,
Aaron had
Kristen. Yeah.
Had a question up, hand up.
I'll fill the silence while my colleagues are thinking here. Let's see. Lowering barriers to participation in the Clean River Rewards program and keeping participants accountable without raising those barriers. So first, I have a kind of a question back at you when you say holding participants accountable. Are you kind of getting at that every 5 years kind of renewing participation in Clean River Rewards? That's kind of the Bureau's proposal for holding folks accountable. Is that, or is there more to that question that I should be responding to?
Broadly, renewal is one of the ways that we're getting there. So just as a reminder, I believe it was in 2017, could have been in 2018. The auditor produced a set of recommendations on Clean River Rewards. And that was one of the things they had said is we don't go back and check. You know, if you're in Clean River Rewards and you stay in your house for 20 years, under our current program, you would keep getting Clean River Rewards for 20 years, regardless of whether or not you're still doing that stormwater, the runoff management. And so the 5-year renewal period is a way to just check and make sure, are you still doing what you said you were doing?
Do you want to flip to that?
I was thinking about that. Thank you.
Maybe review that program and the recommended changes, and then
yeah,
on to that.
Yeah, and so that's where that discount renewal would be required every 5 years. That's the component that you were talking about, Karen. And that is one of those responding to kind of external comments that we've received of making sure that, you know, folks who say they're doing something that we verify that they are.
Mm-hmm. So just my initial gut reaction is those two things seem a little contradictory, like holding folks accountable, which has a little bit of a, I don't know, enforcement sort of feel to it, and expanding access, and what could be a barrier to expanding access. And it almost seems like too many, and I don't know what too many is, requirements to, you know, check the box or fill out or reapply or whatever. I mean, that could be a barrier. So I guess that's just one reflection I have on hard to increase accountability without creating more barriers. So, and more to the first of those two bullets about, you know, potential barriers. And I mean, I'm just thinking as a, you know, the Clean River Rewards recipient, I'll be transparent, for the past, you know, whatever 20 or so years that I've lived here, that, you know, so I don't remember what the, you know, the initial like entry, not fee, but entry requirements were about applying. I mean, I don't recall them being particularly burdensome, but, you know, I can see that, you know, someone in a different situation, it could be very burdensome to even like know the program is out there, know that I could be saving 35% on my bill. And it has a, oh, I don't know. I mean, I can see someone thinking, oh, great, now I need to learn about, stormwater flow and, how many trees I need to plant to what was another, anyway, I was looking at another breakdown in another table in the report that said if you have 4 trees that are at least 15 feet tall, then you can get 2.8% off. And so again, it just, I don't have a specific recommendation, I guess, but it just seems like it's sort of almost anything where you're requiring folks to sort of feel like they have to have a knowledge of soil permeation and native plants and things that are, wonderful and we want to encourage, but just feeling like I need to sort of be a hydrologist or, a scientist or something to know if I qualify for this program or what I'd need to do to stay accountable could be kind of intimidating, and people just, just wouldn't have time for it. Yeah.
Thank you for the observation. I think balancing that lowest barrier possible, but also recognizing there has to be some amount of accountability is definitely a seesaw. We're trying to find that right balance. And thank you for that. What I will say is we've heard similar comments about accessibility of the program and have definitely taken that into account. One thing I do want to add is that the residential application is far more basic. So we don't ask, we do ask questions, where does your runoff drain into your lawn, or, but we're not, the residential application in particular is not very technical. And we are actually even working on trying to make it as plain language and as very clear as possible. So thank you for that. We'll definitely write that down and keep that in mind as we move forward.
Did anybody have any questions about the tiers, the single family residential tiers? The 2 meetings we've held so far, there was support for switching to one, just one single family to tiers.
Just a comment. I like it. I think it makes a lot more sense. I hope that largest tier, there's a couple of comments made that there's not gonna be that many property owners, and I suppose relatively speaking, that's true, but I hope it does capture a lot of the bigger property owners that really do have a lot of impervious surface. Those will also tend to, in a lot of cases, be wealthier landowners as well. And I think for folks that really, and I know it captures more than this, but for folks with huge mansions and lots of infrastructure in their property, that really is a different category than the vast majority of the landscape, and they should be paying substantially for that.
Thank you for that. And just as a tag on that, we still don't know where that 4th tier is going to end up. We're doing analysis internally. But yeah, we don't envision a ton, but we do want to capture, like you said, those large mansions with, say, a pool or a tennis court, and also a big parking garage or parking lot. Those are the types of ones we just want to recognize that structure is, while we call it a single family, it's just it does have a different impact on our system.
So we are just about out of time. I don't know if anybody wants to just give any final observations about what you learned today, or if there's any other things you want to make sure that Anthony and Aaron know about before they go back. All of the questions and comments that you gave here today will be included in with everything else we're hearing as they go back and look at the recommendations. Bob.
Yeah, I just say I'm really impressed with the work you did. I've been involved in some of these battles over the years as they've come up, and I think you've done a really nice job of thinking through a lot of them. I need to dig down on it more for specific things I have questions about or thoughts on, but I think overall, this is a huge step forward for the city, and it heads off a lot of what have been isolated battles over this, with one interest after another kind of coming in and trying to change things around, and the city reacting in real time, and not necessarily in a way that's equitable or fact-based, more politically based. So I really appreciate all the work you've done. I think it's a lot of the big points well.
Lorraine.
Thanks so much, Kristen. I think the one takeaway that I would like to share is that with the recommendation based on the tiered single family residential stormwater charges, is that it not turn into a regressive process, and that the city pays attention going forward as you all implement it, if these recommendations are taken, that be front and center. And when I say I would like it to not be after harm have been imposed over a 10-year period that the city realizes, and like, oh, people lost their homes because of it or whatever, that it be more a real-time tracking of, hey, is this turning into a regressive process where the charges are impacting low-income homeowners more so than a progressive tax system. So another tax system, you know what I mean, charge. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, we didn't talk about anything like that, of how it's evaluated over time.
Yeah, I was gonna add, we are looking at that, Lorraine. So thank you very much for bringing that up. That is a component of our kind of mapping exercise. We're gonna compare it to a couple. I'm not sure which of the equity maps we're going to compare it to. I think we've talked about 2 different ones we might compare it to, but we are looking at that as a way of making sure we're not unintentionally shifting burden where we don't intend to do so. Equity is a key consideration of this, and we feel like that's a way it can manifest itself unintentionally or intentionally. So we want to try and be intentional.
Thank you.
Right. So you all have Aaron's contact information. Aaron, you maybe put your email in the chat. There is a website, has all of this information plus the slides that have been shared. Yours is tailored a little bit, possibly, and then that we will be going out. Aaron's been setting up meetings. They vary in length, the update presentations. So you got the long version, long and very fast version. So we'll see how it goes when we kind of shorten it up for the more neighborhood audience. So there's Aaron's information is in the chat, and I want to thank everybody for the thoughtful questions and listening to a very dense presentation. And I want to, Aaron, do you have?
Yeah, the even denser version, the technical discussion version, is up on the webpage if you really want to dive in and look at the slides. And we recorded it. So if you want to listen to Anthony going through this presentation again in even more detail, if that's something that interests you, you can do that. But the slides are there. So if you want to download that, those are definitely helpful if you want to review those slides.
And additionally, if there's any digging into kind of, oh, where did you get this assumption or how did you get there? There are approximately 300-ish pages of consultant reports, hence the very long presentation, that are all available there. So if you have any questions, I would definitely direct first to that options report, which is about 200 pages. That has all of the kind of backing methodological changing and why and all the engineering stuff that goes behind all the numbers I showed you.
And Anthony, could you say timeline wise? I heard at the beginning of the presentation, you'd be presenting this to City Council, it sounds like in 2024. What is a good deadline for us to keep in mind? The last point that our input would be helpful.
So ideally, we would get input before approximately September of this year. There are certain administrative things that we just kind of have to start setting in motion by September at the latest in order to make sure this is fully put into place. July 1 of 2024, so a year and a little bit away, is when those rates will actually be adopted. We intend to go to council in May of 2024 to talk about that rate ordinance. And then in probably February or March of 2024 as well to talk about the code and rule changes associated with all the things we're talking about here. And finally, we're also talking about trying to go to council in October, November, as more of like a work session or a presentation style, just to let them know what's happening. Because like I had said, some of the administrative stuff either needs to change around September. We kind of have to finalize it by September if we want to make sure it gets fully implemented by July of 24. But with that too, we're happy to answer any questions or clarify anything for you all, because that's definitely a tough, this is a lot of information, as Kristen and Aaron brought up. This that was a 35, I'm a fast talker, and it still was 35 minutes.
And the October work session, I'm sorry, that's October 2023. So this is.
Thank you. Yes, October or November of 2023. We have yet to schedule that. We're still working on that part, but though we intend to go to council then.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks all for the presentation and being here and answering our questions.
Thank you.
All right, well, just in closing, before we adjourn, let's take a quick look at yeah, Amy, why don't you go through a couple of the budget announcements and then we'll close up.
Yeah, so you should have received in email the final letter. Again, thank you to Karen and Alexis, especially for your help in finalizing that. So I sent out the link. Just as far as next steps in the budget process, the mayor will be releasing proposed decisions and the budget document available May 4th. As Aaron just mentioned, or Anthony, the rate hearing each year is typically in May, so it's scheduled for May 24th, 2 o'clock. And so if Hub is going to be wanting to give testimony, there is opportunity to testify at the rate hearing as well. And so that would be a priority for the next 1 to 2 meetings if you want to develop talking points or delegate to somebody to provide some testimony at those meetings. So I just want to make sure that you are aware of those upcoming dates. Any other announcements from the group?
All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Just looking ahead to next meeting, Amy just pointed out something that we may want to at least have a discussion about at our May 4th meeting. Yes, May 2nd meeting, pardon me, May 2nd meeting, is whether we may want to do testimony at the May 24th rate hearing. So might want to spend a few minutes talking about that in a couple of weeks. Also, another quite timely topic I'd like to throw out there for your all consideration is one of the elements of our comments in the budget letter was regarding our caution to the city council and bureaus about kind of going too much too fast without enough public input on restructuring related to looking ahead to changing the city form of government in a year and a half or so. And that does kind of come home to roost with us as a overview sort of budget overview community member committee, in that we may want to be asking ourselves, what do we as current pub members think the role of budget advisory committees will be in the near future of transitioning to different form of government. And we may want to have an opinion on what it looks like after the city changes its form of government. So I'm suggesting that we spend some time talking about that at the next meeting on May 2nd, and particularly to focus in a little bit more, because that could be a huge conversation on forming maybe a subcommittee of folks that want to work on outreach for potential recruitment. Again, we would normally in July, we would have new pub members joining. We might have some continuing pub members, but it's a little difficult to recruit when we don't exactly know what we're recruiting for or we're asking folks to sign up for. So I'm suggesting that May 2nd, we have maybe even just a little bit of brainstorming about that. It doesn't necessarily have to be super structured, but it does seem like we need to start diving into that a bit. So any other thoughts or suggestions for things people want to get on the table, let's say in our next couple meetings, our next couple May meetings? All right, well, let's go get some lunch. In that case, thanks everybody for being here. We'll call our meeting adjourned.